Hey, welcome to Deep Thoughts with Grant Agler. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm just going to share with you some deep thoughts that are going around in my mind. And I had a conversation the other day that I'm just all too familiar with, and it had to do with forgiveness. And I've had to deal with forgiveness and try to figure out what exactly that looks like and how you do it. And here's kind of the problem. When it comes to forgiveness, it's easy when somebody comes and asks you for forgiveness, right? Somebody comes and says, hey, I stole something, I hurt you, I did this, and they confess and they said, will you please forgive me? In that case, it's pretty easy to go, yep. I think it's easy to forgive in those circumstances. But the problem is that a lot of times that isn't what happens. A lot of times somebody's wronged you, somebody's hurt you, and you fester about it and you think about it, and they don't ever ask for forgiveness. They might at some point, but they sure aren't right now, and so that just sort of leaves the relationship undone, and so that creates all kinds of problem, and you're like, well, how do I forgive somebody when they're not even asking me for forgiveness? Well, I still think forgiveness is the key, right? We've got to do that from our end, and here's the deal. We want it to be a process, right? Because processes are manageable and we can take simple steps. Like we like a 10-step program. We like to go through that process. And that does work in a lot of cases with a lot of things. Like if you're going to read the Bible, it's a process. You got to start in the Gospels. You got to move to this place. It's going to take you some time to learn and understand the Bible. Prayer is the same way. It's a process. You learn, you grow, you mature. But the deal is, and this is my conviction, that forgiveness isn't a process. Forgiveness is a decision. It's not a process. It's not something like, okay, you follow these 6 steps and you will have forgiven somebody. It's a decision. And that's all it comes down to. And sometimes people are like, well, I don't know how to forgive. And to me, it's kind of like this. It's in the title. Forgiving someone is to forgive somebody. It's like this. Well, how do I pour myself a cup of coffee? Well, you pour yourself a cup of coffee. That's how you pour yourself a cup of coffee. How do I forgive someone? Well, you forgive someone. And that's where it's challenging because it's like, well, oh man, did I really forgive them? And like, okay, well, they're forgiven. But here's the problem. You make this decision, this logical black and white decision, I'm going to forgive somebody. I think the decision comes down to this, a line I've heard a lot. Forgiveness is to cancel a debt. Right? And so if somebody's hurt you, you're just going to say, I cancel that debt. And that is what it means to forgive somebody, right? So you do that. You go through this black and white, this logical pattern, and you're like, okay, I'm going to forgive, cancel the debt, forgiven. And you feel pretty good about it. And you're like, okay, I've taken care of that. But then something happens. Maybe you remember an old memory, or maybe you start to fester on it again, or maybe you see them in a grocery store, or something comes up and you're like, or maybe they're still in your life very much. And you're like, well, what do I do? Because all of a sudden I got all this emotion and I'm angry again and I'm thinking about it again. And what do I do in that moment? Let me make this point. Just because you have emotions that are kicking up again does not mean that you haven't forgiven them. And what you need to do is forgive them. Again, like that's how it works. It's just a decision that you make over and over and over again. I think it's interesting that Jesus actually turned to the disciples and talked about forgiveness, and Peter was like, well, how many times should we forgive a person? Should we give them 70 times? And Jesus was like 70 times 70, and he was like, there's going to be this over and over again process where you forgive, you forgive, you forgive, you forgive, you forgive, and you forgive, and you forgive. And sometimes you might do that 5 times a day. Sometimes you might do that over and over. Every time you drive by their house or that place you used to work, or a memory pops up in your head, all those emotions, all those feelings are going to come back up again. But you just need to cancel the debt and forgive. And eventually you'll come to a place, if you forgive over time, eventually you're going to get to a place where you have peace. And the emotions that you feel are actually going to connect with this forgiveness that you're offering to somebody. So don't wait for that magical moment to like go, oh, how do I forgive? Like, what's the process? What did Jesus say? Actually, the only thing Jesus really said about forgiveness is this. He says, if you don't forgive, I won't forgive you. That's pretty heavy stuff. Like this isn't one of those optional things, okay? Should I eat a Big Mac or should I have some vegetables, right? You should probably have the vegetables, but you still get to go to heaven if you eat the Big Mac. Thank goodness. In this case, Jesus is like, I've forgiven you. And if you don't forgive, then why on earth would I forgive you? Because you're not even willing to extend that same forgiveness. So if you're struggling with forgiveness, make the decision. Make the decision right now. Don't even wander off and pray about it. Just make the decision that you have forgiven, and every time the emotion pops up, forgive again. It's a decision, not a process. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. Subscribe to our channel. Sometimes we're a little goofy, sometimes we get downright serious, but we always want to challenge you with what God has to say into our lives.